Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to spend a few minutes with me. I'm actually very pleased today to talk to you about our company, Caladrius Biosciences. I'm assuming that we'll get a slide eventually. There we are. Okay. We are a company that is working to develop new restorative treatments for ischemic diseases. We are a public company, so I will be making some forward-looking statements during this presentation. Please keep that in mind if you're making investment decisions. And during the course of this presentation, I'll give you a brief overview of the company, the management team, our fundamental technology, our 3 lead programs, especially some very interesting and exciting data that was just released this weekend at the American Heart Association in Philadelphia. So, as I mentioned, we are a public company. We have a number of lead programs, but I think it's important for people to understand that we are, in fact, a platform company. We are working in CD34 positive cells. These are endothelial progenitor cells naturally occurring in the body. And from that platform, we have produced a pipeline that has 3 late-stage clinical programs, 2 of which have regulatory recognition as breakthrough equivalents in the United States and Japan. We have proprietary field-leading technology, and I think it's important to note that many companies working in cell therapy are not able to actually have intellectual property. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to patent cells, but I'll talk a little bit about how we have managed to create an exclusivity around our products. We have many value-creating events coming up over the next 12 to 18 months. That's important for investors. Those are regulatory events and data events, as well as some potential partnering events. And we have a very seasoned management team, which I'll introduce just a moment, and a strong financial situation, much different than many other companies of our size. So let's take a moment and just introduce the management team. I'm not going to go into any detail here, except to say that collectively, we have about 150 years of drug development experience in big pharma as well as emerging pharma across multiple therapeutic areas, but especially in the area of cardiovascular diseases. And I should note that our Chief Medical Officer, Douglas Lasordo, is one of the pioneers of CD34 cell therapy. So we have literally the world's expert in this technology as our Chief Medical Officer. We also benefit from the cooperation and collaboration with a group of people that I lovingly call the cardiovascular mafia in the United States. These are the clinicians with whom you need to work and from whom you need to have advocacy if you expect to be successful in the cardiovascular world. And they are all actually very enthusiastic about our program. So let's talk briefly about the platform technology in and of itself. So one of the things that people ask about cell therapy is, do you really know how it works? Many people think it's a little bit of hand-waving, smoke and mirrors, but in fact, we actually have quite a bit of preclinical and human clinical data that demonstrates the mechanism of action, pardon me, quite clearly here. As I mentioned, these are endothelial progenitor cells. Their purpose in the body is to promote angiogenesis of the microvasculature. So in short, they grow new capillaries. They don't grow big vessels, they grow very tiny vessels, and they allow us to reperfuse tissues that are being starved of nutrients and oxygen, and that's how they work in the restorative way. We have studied them quite extensively. So again, unlike many other cell therapies who like to present data and get excited about 10 patients or 6 patients, we have almost 1,000 patients of data across multiple indications, multiple investigators, multiple sites, and multiple countries. And all of the data is 100% consistent, showing a therapeutic effect after a single dose of these cells, really no cell-related adverse events, and the fact that you can get a durable therapeutic effect from that single treatment. Another criticism of many cell therapies, and here people refer often to the CAR-Ts, is that they're very, very long to produce and very expensive. Well, in fact, we're the antithesis of that. We are 4 days from vein to vein. This is an autologous cell therapy, so the patient is in fact the donor. The processing is quite simple. There is no genetic manipulation. There is no ex vivo expansion of the cells. So what we do is we mobilize the cells from the bone marrow using GCSF, so there's no bone marrow aspiration, no surgical procedure. And apheresis is the typical collection mechanism for a sample of monocytes, and that sample is sent to a central processing facility where we then sort, the CD34 positive, CXCR4 positive cells. We concentrate them, and then they're resuspended in a proprietary formulation, which is specific to the site of injection, which is also specific to the indication being utilized. The cost of goods here is at least 1 and almost 2 orders of magnitude less than many other cell therapies of this type. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we actually have a quite extensive intellectual portfolio of property. We have 9 U.S. patents granted, several still pending, and over 23 foreign patents in all the major territories of the world. And this covers the pharmaceutical composition of the cells in this media. It's essentially a composition of matter patent for cellular therapies. Also, the serum, as I mentioned, the therapeutic range, et cetera. So it is literally impossible for someone to simply extract CD34 cells in some other way and apply them without crossing our patents. So with that in mind, I'll introduce the 3 programs that we have now, 3 late-stage programs, one in critical limb ischemia, which has a Sakigake designation in Japan. Sakigake is the equivalent of an RMAT designation, something like a PRIME designation here in Europe, but it's essentially a breakthrough designation plus a fast-track designation. So we get a number of regulatory benefits, including a guaranteed 6-month review at the time of filing. That program is in a registration trial, which should finish its enrollment in a couple of months, and we expect to have top-line data about this time next year. It is an open label trial. I will talk about that in a moment, so I can show you some of the very interesting data we've generated to date. Our second program is in coronary microvascular dysfunction. That is a program for which we just announced some very exciting results at the American Heart Association on Saturday. So if you had a chance to look at any of the news releases, you'll see some of that data. I'll reproduce it here in a moment. And then we have a phase 3 ready program, a single registration trial remaining to be completed in the United States in a population of patients with no option refractory disabling angina, or NORDA. And that last program has an RMAT designation in the United States. So let's talk about critical limb ischemia, and I'll pick up the pace here because of the time allotment. So if anyone has any questions, we can chat afterwards outside in the hallway. But this is a program, as I mentioned, that has a Sakigake designation as well as an advanced therapeutic medicinal product designation here in the EU. So critical limb ischemia is really the end stage of peripheral arterial disease. It's a disease of the lower extremities. It's often a comorbidity of diabetes, but not exclusively in diabetics. And basically what happens is the small blood vessels in the legs contract, they deteriorate, and eventually the tissues become starved of oxygen, of nutrients. They begin to show tissue necrosis, and essentially it's a horrible disease. You can watch a person's limbs essentially die from the extremities up. So in the case of the feet, the toes go, and then the middle of the foot, and you see people, treatment is partial amputation working its way up the leg until eventually they succumb to the disease. Berger's disease is a type of CLI, which is also genetic and exacerbated by heavy smoking. And that's a disease for which there really is no treatment. It's really marked by continual deterioration and a very rapid turn to death. These people have symptoms that persist after all available therapies. So because these are capillaries, you can't really stent or bypass them very easily. And they have a very high risk of amputation and mortality. Now, a number of people think that CLI, is not such a bad disease. But I think this will give you a sense. If you can see that green dot sort of in the middle, it might not be easily distinguished. But this shows you the mortality rates of almost all the cancers versus CLI. And you can see that CLI actually has a higher mortality rate than most cancers. And so it's really an insidious disease. We are treating people who are at the moderate to severe level, Rutherford 4 and 5. Rutherford 6 patients are unfortunately beyond salvage. They're already gangrenous at that point. And we can give you a sense here of some of the data that we've been generating previously in Japan. You can see here patients who are a combination of traditional arteriosclerotic and Berger's disease, the same population that we talked about for our study, convert from CLI to CLI-free in about 6 months and remain there for at least 4 years. So a single therapeutic dose is durable for a very long time. The laser Doppler image on the left shows you how a cold foot that's really starved of blood becomes reperfused after as little as 3 months after a single injection. We also can do a similar study with amputation-free survival and get very similar statistically significant results. So we're running this trial in Japan right now. It's a 35-patient trial designed with the PMDA. It is a registration trial, so this is eligible for approval in Japan. The trial includes the standard of care as the control and the same population that we just discussed in some of the other trials. The Buerger's disease cohort is already completed, and you can see that we have, with just 2 patients still having a little bit of follow-up left, a 50% remission rate in a disease where the typical remission is 0%. So these are truly remarkable. And the remaining patients should be completed enrollment by the end of the first quarter of next year, and top-line data should be available this time next year, which means the earliest possible registration in Japan is in 2021 for a commercial product. Our next program in coronary microvascular dysfunction is really a similar type disease, but of the heart. And I just like to remind people that heart disease remains the #1 killer above oncology and all sorts of other reasons for mortality in the United States and the developed world. This is a disease of the microvasculature of the heart that is not accompanied by large vessel disease. So it's really a disease that until recently was very difficult to diagnose. It is now diagnosed using an invasive measurement in the catheter laboratory called coronary flow reserve. And that's a way to quantitatively diagnose CMR. This is CMD. This is also a disease that more frequently afflicts women. About 2/3 to 3/4 of the patients tend to be females in the 40 to 60 year age range. So relatively young people also have this disease. It's a very large population for which there is no treatment at the moment. The ESCAPE CMD trial is the trial that we just reported data at AHA. It's a 20-patient trial looking at CFR as the primary endpoint, done at Cedars-Sinai and the Mayo Clinic in the United States. And the results are really just incredible. We've reported so far 17 of the 20 patients. And you can see here from that group, we have highly statistically significant increases in CFR from people who are abnormal to normal, people who couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without having severe angina. To be in the study, you had to have more than 7 angina attacks a day. All right, so these people were truly debilitated. We have some, I don't have time to show you, some videos and testimonies from some of these patients. They've actually went out and bought bicycles. They're riding bikes, they're hiking, they're shopping with their kids again. They've got their lives back. And you can see similarly from a symptomatic score, all of the statistically significant improvements. Single dose of CD34 cells, 6 months later, they're essentially, I'll use the word in inverted commas, cured. These are curative therapies. So, these are the summary here. I won't read it to you, but the data is very, very compelling. The last 3 patients will complete follow-up in the next several weeks, and the full study will be reported in January. We'll be moving that program very rapidly into a phase 2 randomized trial in the United States. And then our last program, which is an RMAT program, that's a regenerative medicine breakthrough in the United States, plus fast track, is a no-option refractory disabling angina. This is a program that is akin to CMD, except these patients also had large vessel disease. So the large vessel disease, what was seen was obvious. That was treated, bypass stents, typical anginas, and they still had persistent angina. What was left to be treated was the microvasculature. So this becomes, if you will, after treatment of the large vessel disease, akin to CMD. It's a disease of the microvasculature of the heart. We have almost 300 patients worth of data from a randomized phase 2 as well as a early phase 3 data. All of these show improvement in exercise capacity, which is the regulatory endpoint, as well as many other markers, including reduction in frequency and severity of angina. And I'll just flip through these quickly. You can see this is significantly improved exercise time. This is the phase 3 regulatory endpoint, statistically significant at 6 months and at 12 months. This is reduced angina frequency, similar respect, and also, most importantly, a mortality benefit at 2 years from a single treatment of these patients' own CD34 cells. This is the trial. That is the single phase 3 trial that remains to be started. We're planning to start that sometime in the near term. It's a 400 subject trial. In the interest of time, I'll just skip through that, and you can give you an idea of some of the milestones that you can expect. Those are in green are completed. Those that are in blue are expected over the next 6 to 9 months across the entire platform. And our balance sheet is quite clean. We ended the third quarter with $29 million in cash. We've got runway through to 2021. We'll be looking to raise some additional money to support phase 2 for CMD and our phase 3 trials. And I hope you would consider making an investment in our company. And we're back to where we started. So thank you very much for your time. I'm out of time, but have a good day and thank you.